Joe Rogan, of course, we don't need to get into the whole story. We've both rehashed it a million times on Breaking Points and on Secular Talk, but everybody gets the gist of it. Joe Rogan's had on some anti-vaxxer doctors, and then there was a backlash as a result of how they spread a bunch of claims that weren't true, and it's potentially dangerous that they're on air. And then you have Neil Young said, I'm pulling my music off of it, and Joni, somebody else said, I'm pulling my...
Now there's a whole bunch.
Bruce Springsteen's guitarist did it. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them that are fighting. India RE. Okay. Anyway, Spotify reacted to that and basically said, look, we're going to put like a banner on the things that have COVID talks that say, hey, here's more trusted information and here's a trusted source you go to. Similar to what YouTube does when you're covering a controversial topipic, they put like a link underneath.
Yeah.
If people want to click on it. So that's how they answer to it. Joe Rogan released a video where he was like, look, I'm going to try to do better. I'll try to research more beforehand, and I'll also try to bring on people that have the counter opinion to the controversial opinion to balance it out a little more. Now
also he liked the labeling. He was affirmatively.
Yeah, he said he supported the labeling.
Yeah.
That's true. So now you have very interesting character weighing in, somebody who I think we all kind of care what his views are on this. We have Jon Stewart. This video is a little long, but it's well worth it. He's going to explain what his position is on the controversy. Take a look.
Don't leave, don't abandon, don't censor, engage. I'm not saying it's always going to work out fruitfully, but I'm always of the mindset that engagement, and especially with someone like a Joe Rogan, who is not, in my mind, an ideologue in any way. And I think the proof of that was, I don't know if you remember, there was a guy who went on his podcast named Josh Zepps, they were talking about, I think Joe said, myocarditis. Kids shouldn't get the vaccine because it causes a higher risk of myocarditis. And Josh said, well, actually getting COVID is a higher risk of myocarditis for kids, so they should get vaccinated. He said, no, it's not. I said, no, I think it is. He goes, no, I'm pretty sure it's the other way. And they looked it up. And when they looked it up, it came out that it's a much greater risk if you get COVID and you're, 8 to 12 or 6 to 15 or whatever the age range was. It's a much greater risk of myocarditis catching COVID than it is getting the vaccine. And if you are an ideologue or if you are a dishonest person, that is the moment. Like Tucker Carlson in that situation never would have looked it up and would have given that look he gives like somebody's giving him a confusion enema. Like they're just like they're just firing confusion up his ass. And Joe just went like, I didn't know. Oh, okay, I didn't get that. And that to me says, oh, that's a person that you can engage with. And so I think all the overblown rhetoric about him. And here's the other thing. Like, you're a musician. Like, how much misinformation is spread by, like, Eric Clapton is on platforms that you're on, and he's a fucking psycho. So do you remove yourself from every platform? By the way, do we only do these conversations so that I will get in trouble?
Yes, that's all we do now. We go, John, who do you want to piss off today? Neil Young fans, Taylor Swift fans, or Eric Clapton fans?
I love them all, but my point is we all exist in this world and on this planet. And there's no question that there is egregious misinformation that's purposeful and hateful and all those other things. And that being moderated is a credit to the platforms that run them. But this overreaction to Rogan, I think is a mistake. I really do. And
do you think it gives him power to react in this way versus if you actually wanted to say something against his...
Joe Rogan has power because so many people listen to him. But that
because of the elk meat.
Yeah, let me go back because you're right, Jay. Jay Rogan has power because of elk meat. And that is what allows him to have the energy to have all the... But he has 4-hour conversations and they are expansive, and he may say some things that you think is misinformation, and he may platform people that you think are wrong, but to single that out as something so egregious as to have to be, I just don't, I think there are dishonest, bad actors in the world. And identifying those is so much more important to me And I also think sometimes those grand gestures of I'm removing myself doesn't necessarily take into account, like you're on Comcast, right? Comcast or Time Warner. So if you're on any cable station, right, they've got Fox News on. You telling me Fox News isn't a willful purveyor of misinformation, dishonest to its core. So now everybody on TV has to pull out of their fucking shows or deplatform because in the same tube that you exist, they exist. One of the biggest questions I always used to get asked was,
I don't understand that.
Why do you have O'Reilly on your show? And I go, well, I have people in my family that are to the right of him, and I still talk to them. So why not talk to him? And I feel like you have to engage. Like, how do you not engage with people? Like, the whole point of engagement is hopefully clarification. Now, you may not get it. It may be a fool's errand, but I will never give up on engagement.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. So what do you think of his argument?
I mean, first of all, the key thing there, obviously, the entirety of his argument is don't leave, don't abandon, don't censor, engage. And if there ever was a guy who you could do that with, it is Joe Rogan. And he gives the example of that guy, Josh Sepps, is that his name? Mm-hmm. Who went on and they had this back and forth about myocarditis. And not only did they pull it up in real time and have like a real time fact check, but then Joe shares that segment himself on Twitter along with additional information. And we had the same experience on Breaking Points. We had a doctor on, Vinay Prasad,
right,
who went through one of the episodes that was the worst, the Malone and McCullough ones, went through claim by claim and said, here's where they have kind of a point. Here's what's totally wrong.
Right.
Here's what the studies say. Here's what the research is. And guess what? Joe shared that as well, even though it was disagreeing with some of the content that had been on his show. So it's I'm so over this whole controversy because it's so silly to act like Joe Rogan is like Kim Jong-un or something, like this nefarious evil actor. It's ridiculous when you actually have engaged with his content.
So I'm gonna tell a private story now.
Okay.
And I think people will like this story. So it wasn't that long ago, maybe a month or two ago, where Joe got in some trouble he was in a conversation with, I forget who it was, but he argued, Bridget Fetisi, maybe it was?
Yeah.
He argued against paid paternity leave.
Yes.
And he did it pretty glibly, and he took a stance. It was very like, this is what I think about this, I don't like it, right? And so you and I saw that clip. Mm-hmm. I did not agree with him at all. So we decided, coming in to do this show, let's cover that in the intro. I want to play that clip and I want to respond to it. And what did I do? Pulled up all the different graphs. Here's paid time off. Here's how much other countries get. Here's how much we get. We're at the bottom of the barrel. You know, we're like the only developed country that doesn't get paid time off, doesn't get paid maternity leave, doesn't get paid paternity leave, and workers are getting screwed in that sense. I was very clear when we did that segment to lead with, look, Joe Rogan's an honest guy. Joe Rogan's a nice guy. He's got a lot of views that are left that he never gets credit for. But then whenever he says anything right-wing, people always pounce on him.
Right.
So you lead with that. Then I made the argument. Did you know Joe watched that video? And then him and I were texting about it about a week later. And in a very long and detailed text conversation, he said in no uncertain terms, you convinced me. You changed my mind. I didn't know the stuff that you showed. And when I was talking on the podcast, I was just talking to another comedian, sort of talking shit, talking off the cuff. And I said something that now in retrospect, having learned more about it, I was wrong. And in fact, he even supports policies that go way further than that.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I support a 4-day work week. And he was like, I do too. It's like, well, that's way more time off than just paid paternity leave. You're like cutting down the work week so much when you do the math on how many weeks there are and like all the extra days you're getting off. UBI.
Yeah.
Because there was another thing that we were discussing about unemployment, and he was like, well, what if people are like sort of gaming the system a little bit? This is standard right-wing concern. I don't know who we heard it from, Ben Shapiro, Stephen Crowder, somebody like that, right?
Crenshaw.
And I was like, Joe, I support universal basic income. I want everybody to get like $1,000 or $2,000 a month. And he's like, I support that too. So it's like, so you support a policy even to the left of just unemployment. And he's like, yeah, I guess I do. And so now the next time paid paternity leave or paid time off comes up, Joe's going to argue in favor of those things.
Yeah.
That's not possible if he's a dishonest actor, if he's a complete ideologue, and also it wouldn't have been possible if you and I didn't believe in the power of persuasion.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, and by the way, I saw some of the comments on our video of the Joe Rogan one. A lot of them were very fair, very, very good.
Yeah.
But then there were some that were like, look at this, he's going soft on his friend Joe Rogan. Look at him. He won't even do the thing where you're like, what? But not only did what we do work, it worked perfectly. Perfectly. Now,
whereas
look,
if you come in and you're like, this guy's evil and he's bad and let's censor him, like, how much is anyone, Joe Rogan or anyone else, going to listen to you when you're just like out to attack their character and destroy them?
And Jon Stewart's point, I think he made a brilliant point about Eric Clapton, a brilliant point about Fox News.
Well, here,
you can do this deplatforming thing till the end of time where nobody's anywhere.
Where did Neil Young go and take
Amazon, where the drivers have to shit in bags.
It's like one of the most evil corporations on the entire planet. And we're supposed to be like, oh, good job bringing them more billions
and
of
others,
dollars. Like, what?
And others are going to Apple.
Oh,
Apple,
also
slave labor Apple.
Right.
Apple, let's put nets under the buildings in the China factory so that people don't commit suicide as they were doing on a regular basis.
I mean, it's completely deranged.
These platforms aren't controlled by like leftists, right? These platforms are controlled by billionaire CEOs who have every reason in the world to A, want to stay on the government's good side, and B, to not want their wealth to be redistributed, which is certainly, like kind of the main thing that we want. And so I think that if we weaken free speech norms, if we make it easier to crack down on so-called misinformation, that's not going to go well for us, because people will say things like, oh, sure, I don't want to censor opinions, but you can censor people for being wrong about facts. But every political argument is at least partially an argument about facts, right? Does raising the minimum wage really increase unemployment? How many people really are killed by drone strikes or civilians? And so both sides always accuse the other one of spreading wrong facts. And the people who get to decide are ultimately going to be accountable to these billionaire CEOs. I mean, I just give one small example in the piece that I think makes the point, which is, imagine a world where podcasts and Spotify already existed in 2002. Who do you think would be more likely to get the censorship hammer for misinformation? People who agreed with the government, who agreed with the New York Times that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, or people who said that like Bush administration officials were conspiring to mislead the public about it?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a sort of a debate ender point right there.
Yeah, it's a perfect point.
But so let me play devil's advocate for a second. And it's tough. It's tough for me because I'm like 1,000,000% in your camp. But how do you respond to the people who say, listen, I'm tired of hearing the free speech angle to this because this has nothing to do with free speech because it's a private company that we're talking about, not the government?
Yeah, I'd say that if you're a right-wing libertarian, that makes perfect sense from your point of view.
Right.
If you're a leftist, it makes no sense.
That's right,
that the same way we wouldn't say if you work at Walmart and you don't like the working conditions there and you don't think you're paid enough, don't demand union representation to higher minimum wage. Just go find somewhere else to work because it's all freedom of association. Like you don't have to work there. They don't have to employ you. Whatever. We understand that the government is not the only source of power that can be problematic in our society.
So one of the other things that you bring up in this piece is you cite this Move On petition where they want Rogan to be completely banned from Spotify, and they accuse him of being a white supremacist. And so this gets into a whole other issue. Something I've taken issue with is there's this very caricaturish view of who Joe Rogan is. If you just listen to the media interpretation of what his podcast is, you'd think every guest was an anti-vaxxer. That it's like white nationalist anti-vaccine hour on Joe Rogan all day, every day. What is the reality? Why do liberals in particular, but some elements of the left as well, want to sort of push him towards the right-wing camp and say, oh, this guy's just a right-wing propagandist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the piece, I mean, I run through a lot of, some of the most obvious pieces of counter evidence here, like the fact that in 2018, when the Trump administration instituted its, child separation policy, that Rogan had this like 2-minute rant that I linked to where he says that if you don't have a problem with this, you're not on Team Human. In the next year, he had Cornel West on, which he said was one of his all-time favorite episodes of the show because West is brilliant, which is a position I don't hear a lot from white supremacists. and yeah, and also let's not forget, right? I mean, who is, you know, I would think, you know, I don't know. I mean, like if you were a white supremacist, unless you're so, you know, like unless you're so far off the grid in your white supremacism that you're, you know, that like you don't want to support anyone, you know, you think it's all the Jews or whatever. Like they have, if you're going to support a mainstream candidate, presumably it would be Trump. I'm not saying everybody who supports Trump is a white supremacist because I don't think that's true, but I would think that would be the white supremacist candidate. Joe Rogan supported Bernie Sanders in the primaries, which also doesn't seem very, you know, like a very white supremacist thing to do. I think that the more honest thing to say about Rogan's politics is that he's a little bit all over the place. That I wrote an article with Michael Brooks about this, actually when that Sanders endorsement controversy happened for Jacobin, and I think the truth is that if you watch and listen to a lot of Joe Rogan, he has a mixture of guests with very different views who he often, sometimes just out of friendliness and sometimes because it's his idea of how you should be a host, and like sometimes I think out of genuine agreement, right? You know, that like, you know, there's a lot of like, oh yeah, man, good point, you know, from with a wide range of figures. Although I would point out that some of the most memorable times he's pushed back against people have been like Dan Crenshaw or Dave Rubin, you know, who
Steven Crowder. Candace Owens.
Yeah.
That's right. That was his biggest disagreements were with those people.
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of crazy that people assume he's a right winger. I think the reason, as far as I can tell, is this. Why is it that right wingers who actually disagree with Rogan about more subjects than the left disagrees with him on are so willing to claim him and say, oh, Joe Rogan is awesome, that's our guy. Whereas even when he endorsed Bernie Sanders, you know, there were a certain number of, you know, again, mostly more mainstream liberals. A lot of it was like bad faith, supported by, you know, supporters of other candidates. But even some people on the left were like, no, we don't want the world's most popular podcaster, you know, to support our guy. And I think a lot of it, what it gets down to is whether you really believe that you can win, whether you see politics as a realistic project to change the world, or whether you see it as kind of taking a symbolic moral stand against everything that's wrong with the world. And I think a lot of people on the left in practice, unfortunately, are taking the second view, which means that if you have 10 positions and 7 of them are pretty closely aligned with you, and, you know, one of them's, you know, ambiguous, and a couple of them are bad, then you'll like laser in on the bad ones because you think, oh, the question you're asking is essentially like, is he a good person who's going to go to heaven like us, or is he like a bad person who's going to go to hell? And like, that's like, oh, well, whatever, you know, here are his sins, you know, that like, here are the bad positions, rather than is there important overlap here such that like, why not play up, you know, when he's pushing back against, you know, Candace Owens, like, why not play that up? Why is it that like more progressive media didn't, you know, trumpet that clip and, you know, was like, you know, do little segments, you know, Joe Rogan destroys Candace Owens, you know.
Well, like, I did. You're preaching to the choir here, Ben.
That's an insightful point, though, about why the left's inclination is to just find the flaws and judge them rather than trying to pull into a coalition and use the powerful platform he has.
So to your point, he's had on Cornel West, Bernie Sanders, me, Abby Martin, David Pakman, and he's also had on the likes of Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro, and he's had us on like a number of times. And I remember having a conversation with somebody about this at one time, and I was like, well, what's the connecting tissue there? And the connecting tissue from Joe's perspective is that in his judgment, these people, agree or disagree with them, are honest and authentic. Now, I don't happen to agree with his perspective on that because I don't think Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder are honest or authentic, but that's his reading of the situation, and it's pretty clear to see that that is his reading of the situation. So,
wait, you guys have matching. You have a Starbucks Workers United mug. And you have
nice.
A shirt.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
awesome.
I just had to call that out.
The harshest criticism one could give, if they're looking at this fairly, in my opinion, of Joe, is that, yes, he's sort of apolitical from time to time, or he views himself that way, so he's wishy-washy in a certain sense. He's open-minded, which is a good quality on the one hand, but he could also be open-minded to a fault. He's sort of an enlightened centrist with some left-wing views and some right-wing views. But yeah, to the broader point, I think the breakdown is the left used to have a stance of like, we believe in purity of policy. So we have these broad goals that we're pushing for, like universal health care, free college, ending the wars. Like there's a purity of policy that made up the left, that constituted the left. Now that has transferred to, we care more about purity of character, which I couldn't care less about purity of character. We're supposed to be the people who say, I don't care if you were a murderer and you were reformed and rehabilitated in jail. If you were really reformed and rehabilitated in jail, you deserve a second chance. Now we say, you had a blog post in 1994 that was slightly offensive, so you're kicked out of the club. So I don't know what led to that breakdown, but you could speak on that, Ben.
Yeah, and sometimes people literally believe both at the same time. I mean,
that's right. Very commonly.
Yeah. It's a war on nuance is what it is. That's what it drives me crazy, Ben. It's a war on nuance. It's like you're with us all the way or not at all. And again, not on policy, on personal character, which is so weird to me because personal character is so arbitrary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do I care about somebody's personal character if I'm like their friend? Sure. I have do I care from the perspective of trying to change the world? Not very much. And there are a lot of people who, again, somehow are simultaneously doing both. That they're like, that they want, either they're. I mean, there are people who are like prison abolitionists who still think that like people shouldn't get jobs because of stuff that they tweeted as teenagers, and like that's. I've met a bunch of people like this, and like if you.